masculinity is, currently in a crisis. What do you think that crisis is, and why do you think we're currently in that place?
Sure. So I think that the world has changed undeniably over the past probably 40 years. And I think that women have made a lot of strides, and femininity in general has made a lot of strides. Obviously, I think that there's a lot less stigma around women making a lot of money, or women going into the workplace, or
Mhm.
women taking things upon themselves, which is all great. I think that additionally, masculinity has changed in the sense that we are responsible for a lot of things that we maybe weren't responsible before. Obviously, there was the whole Me Too movement, and there was a lot of things that were very good. But what that means is that I think masculinity hasn't had the sort of full rebirth in 2023 that makes sense. It doesn't have a
Mm.
an identity that's well defined. And so what that means is there's a lot of young men growing up today who are, that's the time, right? When you're supposed to become a man, when you're going from whatever age it is, but when you're supposed to become a man, all of a sudden now it's this nebulous thing, whereas it used to be somewhat better defined. And so I think that a lot of people are looking for that kind of, you should do this and be this and act like this. And it's not really out there. And a couple people who, again, I just don't agree with, came through really sort of loud and, again, like confidently said, no, this is what a man is, or this is what a woman is. And it's very easy to gravitate towards that. And that's why I don't fault any of these impressionable young men for looking for idols, because there is somewhat of a void. And so I think that's where it is there was this gap. And it's easy to sort of, when you hear someone confidently saying something and they have what you would consider to be credibility, whether that's money or women or fame, to be like, no, what he's saying makes sense. And I think that it's not what I would agree with. And so I think that's what it is. I think it's this, it needs to be redefined, right? I think that that's what the crisis is the world changed. It's time to redefine it. And we need to redefine it in a way that makes sense given the current state of the world, and not trying to hark back to a time before things, changed. I think that we've made a lot of strides. I think the world is generally a better place than it was before. So let's not go back to that. Let's change it and make it what it makes sense to today.
Yeah, I completely agree. And going back to the point of not faulting young people for, grabbing on to the first thing that they find resonates with them. I remember reading this US Surgeon General announcement. I think it was released recently. There's currently an epidemic of loneliness in the US, and young people are getting particularly hit the hardest. I think it's something like the age group of like 13 to 24 or something of the sort, spend, 70% less time with their friends than they did like 2 decades ago. And
Wow.
then, yeah, it's insane. And thinking about, being in the pit of loneliness, for, a boy, a teenager, or a man, and, not having kind of that purpose that, you and I know is, what can kind of set men free. And then you then look towards these male role models, and it's like, okay, so this is what it is. And that's kind of, where the toxic lessons I think can come from. Does this quote resonate with you? It goes something along the lines of hard times create good men, and then good men create easy times, and easy times create weak men. And it's just like a circular cycle.
Yeah, I think that it does resonate with me. I think that, history would indicate that that's also, the case, right? But I
Mhm.
think that the reasoning why that might happen is also a fault of just the sort of last step in that iteration of easy times create weak men could be stopped if, and that's something that I, think about all the time, is like, okay, I plan on being very successful. How would I sort of instill some of the characteristics of hardworking and humility and all these things into my kids? And it's something that I do struggle with. But I think if that sort of problem could be solved, I don't know if that necessarily has to happen. I don't know if the cycle necessarily has to happen. I think that the kids of the grandkids of very wealthy people generally are very spoiled, and maybe aren't strong men or good men, whatever the quote is. I don't have the answer of how to solve that. Does it resonate with me? I would say yes. I don't think it's a fact of life like gravity that it's sort of doomed to happen, and
Mm.
we're just in this cycle, and it'll repeat, and hard times are coming, and after that, there'll be another generation of great men.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. For another episode that we did, we interviewed a like popular, like business and life coach on social media. And one of the things he talked about was, his experience as a kid. He grew up in a group home and, it was just like the most extreme level of poverty that, a person could imagine in the US. And, the conversation that we had was, how can I instill in my kids who now grow up with a silver spoon of like the same lessons that I learned from overcoming that hardship? And he says, that's something that him and his wife talk about a lot. And so to your point, it's a hard problem to solve, but just because something is hard, we need to try anyways. And, why not? So one thing I wanted to talk about backstage is you had this video of, 5 life lessons. I believe they were: nobody has it figured out. As you grow up, you're also watching your parents grow up. Life will always be unfair. The best way to approach relationships is, how can I add value to this relationship? And there are no bunk beds in a coffin. So I imagine each of those lessons perhaps has an experience or story of how you came to that. So I was wondering if you could pick out maybe, a lesson or two and then share, kind of your story or experience of how you came to that.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I think that one that I just wish a lot of people really did focus more on was the parents one. I think that whether you have a good relationship with your parents or a bad relationship with your parents, through listening of all of my friends growing up in different situations than I did, but also looking at my own situations, I think it's very easy to blame a lot of your own faults, or to you know complain about the situation you grew up in or the way that your parents handled certain things. And as I get older, I am older now than the age my mom was when she was married. And I think that's true for a lot of people.
Mm,
That's kind of like, whoa, okay, think about my mental state now. Do I feel like an adult? Would I be ready to raise a kid? I mean, it's kind of wild to think about. And
mm,
so I think having that perspective is, that's mainly the one, but then also the thing I think I mentioned when I'm talking about that is looking at photos, right? And I say that you're watching your parents grow up. And so it's the photos of me when I'm a kid, and, looking at my parents and realizing they are they've aged. And it's like in your mind, they're kind of the same people they were when you grew up, but no, they're totally different. They've had just as much life experience as you have since those photos. And having that perspective, I think, will allow you to treat your parents as more human. And that also goes into the second one, which I would guess I can talk about, which is that nobody has it figured out. I think that for a lot of people, their parents, their teachers, whomever it is, have all the answers, right? What they say
mm,
is law. And I have had a couple times where I've had serious sort of disagreements with my father about decisions I've made. And it started off and it was like, okay, like, again, what he says is law. I'm under his roof, all so on and so forth. And as I got older, I realized that these decisions not only got bigger, but that I was more steadfast in my reasoning. And
mm,
we just fundamentally had disagreements about certain things in life. And it culminated finally when I actually decided to not pursue a graduate degree and instead to start work immediately. And what that meant is that was sort of like the severing of the ties of, I'm no longer under his, like, on his payroll, right?
yeah.
I can fund myself, I can pay my own bills. And he said, the quote that I remember that was really good is, listen, I may not always agree with what you do, but I will always support you. And I was like,
Mm,
okay, that now all of a sudden we're two people who are, he's still my dad, and he's still someone I look up to, and there is still that dynamic, but we're two adults who are making decisions and have different perspectives on certain things. And so I think that a lot of people, the earlier they realize that when I say nobody has it figured out, really like nobody has the right answer to everything. Nobody has the right answer to situations you're in. Realizing that, okay, there are things that at some point you need to be able to make a decision on your own, or you need to be able to look critically at decisions that they make
Mm.
is a super valuable lesson. And that's one that I think that those two are obviously particularly relating to parents and to, but I think that parents have a profound way of who you become as a person.